Disclaimer, we don't do this. We don't know much about video, but we have noticed there's an extreme lack of how-to videos for the Versys 300X. So what we're doing is, and if you've looked this far, you probably understand it, we are going from the 14 tooth to the 15 tooth counter shaft sprocket to lower the RPMs at highway speed. And like I said, if you made it this far, you know that. We know so far that you need 8mm socket to take off the counter shaft sprocket case. This is a 5/32 Allen, right? But we believe these are metric, but this one fits just fine for that loose fitting nut. And then we know that you need a 27mm socket. We have an 1/16", which is awful close. We're going to see what it does. We also have a torque wrench. The torque specs for the rear axle nut is 72, and the counter shaft sprocket nut is 93.7 foot-pounds. We do know that. So we're going to pause for a minute and get everything set up to start, and we'll be right back. All right, we took the sprocket cover off. Just 2 bolts, both 8mm, one at the top, one at the bottom. There is the kickstand relay wire that goes through this little fitting you have to take off, no big deal at all. We did find that loosening the bolt on this plastic and taking it out and pulling this plastic back allowed the cover, the sprocket cover, to come out more easily. So we did get that far. We cleaned up a little grease inside and around there, some of the grime, so that we're not grinding it into the tools or our fingers. And we also, as you can see, pan around, we work in our living room. Show them, Bonnie. So we just wheel the bike right through the front door. Alright, we are going to go collect the tools to pull off or remove the back axle, or loosen the back axle so we can loosen the chain, and then we'll start with the process. Alright, before we loosen the back axle, we're going to go ahead, while the chain is tight and the tire is tight and everything, we're going to go ahead and remove this, the counter shaft nut. In order to do that, you have to take off this, we've always called them a bash washer, but I don't know what they're called. You'll definitely run into it. This little metal flap folds over this facet of the nut itself, keeping the nut from spinning. I, in the past, have done this on KLRs using a cold chisel. It's just a dull, thick steel. There's probably better ways. That's the way I do it. So we are going to loosen the bind on that nut by lifting that up, and then we'll be back. So basically, you can kind of beat on both sides as well, and just trying to open that up without damaging the washer as much as you can. This is actually working really well. That's why I've always used a cold chisel for it. I think I've actually already gotten it. Bonnie, if you want to come closer, you can see. It's open enough where it will allow that nut to spin. And so that's what we're going to do now with the 1 1/16 inch socket that we have. But I believe the actual correct socket is a 27mm. I know they're slightly different, but we're thinking this might work. We'll just see. If the nut's really tight, we may run into a problem, but we'll see. Alright, we did decide to go ahead and take this bolt out of this plastic so we can kind of just move it more freely. Taking this entire plastic off would probably be better, but we're not going to mess with that. 1 1/16 socket. 1/2 inch drive. This nut is quite a booger. I believe the spec calls for a 27mm, but it's 9 o'clock at night and we don't have one, so we're using what we have. We're hoping that it's a tight enough fit that it will serve. If you're using an air impact wrench, you want to have the vehicle or the bike completely out of gear, because the impact wrench is tough on the internal gears. So to stop this sprocket from spinning, we're going to use a series of metal bars to lock in the back sprocket on the swing arm to keep the wheel from being able to spin. In addition, we'll hold the back brake, and just hopefully it's not on there too tight. So we are going to take a go at that now. Here's the pipe we chose to use. I think it's about 1 inch. It fit really well through the back sprocket. And we're basically just bracing it on the back swing arms. On the other side, we had to kind of shift around some brake lines. Just make sure that whatever your pipe's sitting on is something that it can't damage, because there is going to be a great deal of force put on it. So with this in place, we're going to put the socket on the nut and take a couple cranks at it and see if it loosens up. I want 2 things to happen here. I want to end with all my skin I currently have.
Okay.
Alright, unfortunately, it's not wanting to come off very easily. Even though we do have, this is a fairly heavy duty 75T Craftsman 1/2 inch drive. But I'm going to put this substantial breaker bar on it. And what you want to do in a situation like this, an impact wrench is the best. But if you don't have one, you want to try to deliver some jerky movements downward on it, like an impact wrench would do. A consistent steady pressure is not the best way to break a nut of this type, or any type really. So I'm going to put this breaker bar on here. We're not going to keep the camera on. It's just, you know, they're just a battle. So if you've done this before, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, you're about to find out. We'll be back shortly. Alright, so we were able to do it with this right here. It was kind of funny. There was a wasp nest in it, in our breaker bar, and we basically just had this apparatus back here. We did go ahead and release the bolts on the chain guard because our stopper bar right here was causing this to bend. So my wife held the brakes, this stopper bar, and this huge breaker bar and 1/2 inch drive. We were able to break the nut successfully. It's ready to be, now we have to remove, or loosen the back axle, loosen the chain, and put the new sprocket on. So we'll see you in a sec. Alright, in order to remove the front sprocket, the countershaft sprocket, we have to loosen the back tire, therefore to loosen the chain. So to do that, you have to take out this cotter pin out of the castle nut, which I've already done one side. You just grab it and straighten it out and pull it out. Okay, it turns out this is also the 27 mil, which is what we're using, is an 1 1/16. Very, very, very similar. It doesn't require a deep well, but that's all we have at that size. The other side of the rear axle is a 17 mil, which we're handling that with our 3/8 inch drive. So we don't know if it'll spin or not. We've never done that. So anyway, this part's fairly self-explanatory. We'll go ahead and not take this axle out. We're just going to loosen it to loosen tension on the system. We'll also loosen these tensioner bolts, and we'll see you in a sec. Alright, so we've loosened the castle nut as covered in the previous little section there. Now we're going to loosen the chain tensioner keeper nut and then the regular tensioner nut to release them both enough to push the tire forward a little bit. The smaller nut, the keeper nut, probably a better name for it, we just call it a keeper, is a 12 mil, and the actual nut itself to release that tensioner is a 14.
Okay.
Alright, so we loosened those items. We loosened the chain tensioner bolts, and you can make notice of your ticks right here on your tensioner tape, or whatever you call it, however the thing that you measure the tension by. But you're putting a larger sprocket on, so it is going to change where the ticks are. So it's up to you. You can measure that if you want. Either way, the chain will just have to be brought back to its correct tension, and the same on each side. So for now, we're just going to loosen the axle forward a little bit, and that's probably enough right there. Just pushing the back tire forward, move the axle up enough to loosen. Now the chain's real saggy. We're able to now take off the front sprocket. We went ahead and pulled the chain off the back sprocket just to give the chain completely, make it completely free for us to pull this off. So the next step is to now pull off this chain stay. There's probably a better name for it. That's what I've always called it. It just keeps the chain, if the chain were to break, from going around and slapping the motor. So we're going to go ahead and pull that off, and that will allow this sprocket to come off freely, as well as to free it from the chain. So we'll see you in a sec. This is the factory sprocket we took off, the 14 tooth. This is the one we purchased, the 15 tooth. It looks completely different in terms of not the shaft size, but the makeup of the sprocket is a different profile. It has these rubber moldings on it and all this. The factory one, the one we got didn't, and it also has the old school plate that used to hold the sprocket on. Some of them were that way instead of a nut. So I'm sure this is a sprocket that's, in fact, on the packaging I saw that it worked also for the Ninja and one other bike. So we're assuming that foundationally it's the same sprocket. It just doesn't have all the farkle. So we shall see. And we're going to go ahead and put it back on and reverse the process. Our camera battery is running low, so we will see how much of this we can get. Alright, so we went ahead and put the new sprocket on. We reattached the 8mm bolt chain keep. Again, there's probably a better name, I just don't know it. So that's on. Next step for us is to put the bash washer, again, probably a better name for it, that's what we've always called it, on, and the nut. From there, we'll be just getting the chain to the correct tension and replacing the cover, and we are done. Alright, so we've got the chain back on, we've got the chain tensioner back on. Like we said, the next step here is to get the chain back to the proper tension. We've gotten the front sprocket nut as tight as we can, but we're going to go ahead and get the chain to the proper tension, tighten the back axle nut in order to put our torque on this. We're going to kind of have to repeat the same system where we put a bar in and stop the tire from moving so that we can get a nice torque on it. And I believe that's 94 pounds. I think it's 93.7 pounds. We'll double check at the end, but right now we're shooting for 93.7. Alright, so we've gotten the back tire all in place, everything tightened to spec, the chain tightened to spec. All we have to do now is put the countershaft sprocket nut to spec, which is 93.7 pounds. Again, with the same socket, the 27mm, which in this case we're using the inch and 1 1/16 inch, because we don't have the 27, but that, and then we'll replace the front sprocket cover, and we're done. So hopefully this helped. Hopefully you've gotten all the information you need. Like I said, we don't do this, so we don't know what we're doing, but we know that there's a vacuum of information for this bike, so we're hoping this little tutorial helped. That's it.